Welcome back to the Resilient Philosopher. This is De Leon Dantes. History can teach us many things. Personally, I enjoy reading historical moments. I find myself sometimes watching documentaries on history, not just any type of history, but history and how systems operate. It is important to understand that truly history never repeats itself because the characters change, the systems change, but identities and ideologies all have patterns, and those patterns are observed through history. So today's conversation is simply a reflection of how I see the patterns in history. It is important to understand that this is not an episode by any means where my views will be political or religious, but simply an identity and systems throughout history. See, if anything I've learned in history is that sometimes the belief that we identify ourselves within the system will safeguard us from the consequences of the system. For as long as we abide by the system, we reap its benefits. And that can give us a illusion of safety where, since we're part of the system and we abide by its rules, nothing can happen to us. I've seen it many times in corporations where people think that just because they've been in a company for decades, because they have so much knowledge, because they do their job so diligent that they can say or do whatever they want without repercussions. But that is not always the case. You see, history has shown us that systems will allow you to stay as part of them for as long as you abide the rules. The moment that you start picking which rules you're going to follow, or you start criticizing the system because of changing leadership, or because you're no longer obtaining what you used to obtain from it, and you begin to dissent against the system, you find yourself replaceable. You find yourself being the victim of just like all the other people that you previously made victim of. And I often have said this in the past where the humble idea that today you're in a position of power and yet tomorrow somebody else will be and you might need their help should make you treat everyone with the same respect and equity as you want to be treated by others. In history, we have seen many times where people have aligned with an ideology and later on found themselves being victims of the same ideology and systems. And that is why it is important for us to sit back and reflect when we look and read historical events. We must see ourselves not as participants, not as readers trying to recreating our mind the moment, but we must see ourselves as observers. We must look for the patterns that created the vacuum that led to injustice, that led to inequality and make victims of all. You see, what it seems like to be just another regular day can turn significantly different when we don't realize that we are all potentially in the same situation. You're driving to work, you're in a rush, a car in front of you is driving too slow, you blow the horn, you try to get around them, you can't get around them because there's a car next to you. You're getting impatient. You start having rage. All of a sudden, you get an opportunity, you pass by the car, and what do you notice? A 70-year-old man driving the car. And in that moment, you feel rage and you say, no 70-year-old man should be driving a vehicle, especially if they're going to drive it so slow that they can create an accident. And let's say you're in your 20s. You get to work, you tell the stories to your coworkers, which also are between their 20s and 30s. They all agree with you. They all feel like elderly people shouldn't be driving in the road because they're a danger to society, because they can create accidents, because they do not have the same reaction time as you do in your 20s and 30s. But you missed a point. See, you became a participant instead of an observer. If there's anything history has taught us, is that today you might be in your 20s or 30s, but before you know it, you'll be in your 70s and 80s. And what happens when an elderly cannot rely on their family members to take them to an appointment, to go grocery shopping, to get their meds? Well, they have two choices, or at least the two following choices. There's always plenty more choices to be made. But they can either get those things delivered to them or go and get them themselves. But in a society where equity is no longer available even to its youth, then how do you expect a 70 or 80-year-old person to be able to obtain equity? They have to share a road with people that are all of driving age from, let's say, 18 to 80 years old. They now, as pointed out by your 20, 30-year-old mentality, they're too old to be driving because they have lost their reflexes. But what can they do? What can they do differently? Well, nothing really. You see, the choice, the option, is not for them, but for you. You can help a community by helping the elderly, by finding out and promoting a network where a system is established that the elderly get helped, that somebody goes and helps them get their groceries, that somebody drives them to the appointments, that somebody brings their medication home, to protect them from having to go on the road and potentially causing or having an accident. But see, that requires reflection. That requires you to remember that in the near future, You yourself will be 70 or 80 years old driving down the road slowly because you yourself have to get your medications, have to go to an appointment, have to get the things done as you did when you were 20. This is the importance of noticing the patterns of life, the patterns of systems. When we let ourselves think that history is just in the past, history will never be repeated. That's an illusion. We're moving forward to a greater time. For as long as you do not look at the patterns that created the history, the present moment is still under the same patterns. It is up to us to understand those patterns and change them for a better or a greater good, I should say. So the question becomes, what are you doing within your community as a leader, as a serving leader to make a difference and not repeat history again? How do you change the patterns? Well, that is important to do, but the most important part is to stop listening to the noise. Build your identity and values and ethics and the mere thoughts that whatever happens to someone else today can happen to you tomorrow. If you do not start thinking that way, and you think that the outcomes and the current moment will never come to you, you will wake up one day experiencing the same outcomes as others. Because time progresses, time doesn't change. If you're 20 today, a decade will fly by and you'll be 30. And there's a new generation of 20-year-olds looking at you already as part of history. What have you done in those 10 years to make a difference? What have you done to make the world around you better? That is the question that we need to ask ourselves. I do not have the answers by any means. I have learned what I've learned through making mistakes that I wish no one else had to make. And now, in my 40s, I found a platform, I found a way to express my mistakes in hopes to help other people not make the same ones. But it's impossible. It is impossible to do because if I don't teach the patterns, if I don't talk about the patterns of what got me to make those mistakes, then you won't see them. And my words will be in vain. Because words come easily and are forgotten just as well. But patterns stay. They are repeated. Not only are they repeated, but they're repeated by different characters in different moments and in different situations. That is why at times justice is not truly justice. Because when we aim to find justice, we forget that the outcomes of, in a case of a crime, finding the justice is not going to change the outcome. By no means. If it is a person that was killed, finding justice is not going to bring that person alive. Holding people accountable for what they do is what we should aim for. Because justice can be emotional driven. And when it's emotional driven, it's egotistic. It soothes the self. If we were truly to impart justice in a case of a murder, it will be up to the family of the victim to give the justice. But as a society, we cannot allow that to happen. That's why we make laws. But we have to remember when we elect leaders to make those laws that just as you are 20 and will be 70 in a blink of an eye, those same laws that they pass can later on be used on a child of yours, on a friend, or anyone else. That is why a society has to be built on ethics, an ethics of equity, where we all can find refuge in our laws that is there to protect everyone, from a child to an elderly person. Justice has to be the place of solace for all members of a society. Justice cannot be for the few. Justice has to be for the overall good of a society. Just as we all move forward in our age, we must aim to better the world. Don't wait until you're 70 to do so. Start today. Make a difference today in the choices that you make. Try to help an elderly person. Try to help more your parents. Try to help more your coworker. Try to be a member of society better than you were yesterday. Do not follow the noise of ideologies, of biases or narratives by those that want to create a system that can lead to oppression. Because everything can be changed once you look at the patterns and you make the effort to bring equity to the system, to make a system that is or includes everyone within the system, not just a few. So it is important for us to reflect on the patterns of history in order to create a better future in the present moment. I always ask myself, how could I have done better? Even though I did good. But there's always a better way. It's not about winning a discussion, it's not about winning an argument, but it is about what did we learn from such situation. That is where growth comes. So if you're behind that car going slow and you're starting to get that rage and you're starting to feel like, what is going on? How can this person go so slow? Remind yourself, it is not how fast we get to where we're going, but how we get there and who we helped along the way that matters the most. So if it is within your hand today to help someone else, do it. Because by helping them, you're helping society. You're changing the patterns within a system that needs you to change the patterns of history. As always, I thank you again for listening to another episode of The Resilient Philosopher. I remind you that our books are available for free to download in the website, and if you're a member of Kindle Unlimited, you can download it through there. We also have 2 of our books on Audible, and please share this episode. Share any episode of The Resilient Philosopher because this community needs to be heard. In a time where the noise is so loud, it is the silence of the few, the silence of critical thinking, of observance, of wanting to seek knowledge that is important to be heard. And the best way to do this is by always showing up for yourself. Until next week, this is De Leon Dantes, the Resilient Philosopher.